Well, this show needs no introduction. Widely celebrated as one of the greatest shows of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender was co-created by Brian Kutzko, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, and Michael Dante DiMartino, or as fans like to call them, Brike. With the first pilot of the show, Nickelodeon told them that you totally broke the rules on how to pitch a show. The first pilot of Avatar: The Last Airbender had noticeable differences with the show. Aang has a different voice, Zuko has a pet hawk, Katara is named Kaya, there's no Uncle Iroh. It was likely intended as an example of what the show would look like. So, shall we not waste any time? Welcome, my friends, to Avatar: The Last Airbender, Book 1, Water.
The world.
The creators were inspired by other legends and lore properties like Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings. Remember, in the early 2000s, those two properties were huge. But also took a love of Eastern art and mythology. Using real-world Asia as an inspiration for the show's settings, the show was also made up of excellent voice casts. Zachary Tyro Eisen, Dante Bosco, Mae Whitman, Jack DeSana, and finally the late great Maiko. Such an excellent voice cast. All directed by the excellent Andrea Romano, who is probably the best voice director ever. Let's begin with our opening. It does an excellent job of setting up the setting of the show. There are 4 nations, water, earth, fire, and air, and they used to live in peace. But then 100 years ago, the Fire Nation attacked. Only the Avatar, master of all 4 elements, could stop them, but he vanished. Now we meet Katara and Sokka of the Southern Water Tribe after their father went to war.
I still believe that somehow the Avatar will return to save the world.
Our first episode, The Boy in the Iceberg, introduces us to the nature of the world, the concept of bending. Somebody has the power of one of the 4 elements, water, earth, fire, or air. Technically, fire is not really an element, but we ignore that for story purposes. So the 2 Water Tribe siblings are trying to catch food. We establish Sokka and Katara's characters here. Katara is established as being the mother of the group, while Sokka is a deadpan snarker, a butt monkey, but protective, and a little bit of a sexist. Oh boy, this sets Katara off and she gets pissed.
Have you ever smelled your dirty socks? Let me tell you, not pleasant!
Yeah, shame you probably don't have laundry detergent in your world. An iceberg cracks and they find a boy inside named Aang, along with Appa, his flying bison. It's also here that we meet the true stars of the show.
Uncle, do you realize what this means?
I won't get to finish my game.
There's this weird moment where Iroh gives Zuko a pretty sinister death glare, though this may have been a leftover from the original idea that he would in fact be evil all along. We get an establishment of Aang's character that he's basically a goofy kid. Also, the first hint that Aang has a bit of a crush on Katara.
Why are you smiling at me like that?
I was smiling?
When Aang and Katara accidentally set off a flare in an old Fire Nation ship, the Water Tribe wants Aang to leave. He does so, but as it turns out, Zuko has come to attack. We don't get a reason for why he wants the Avatar so badly, other than his honor being at stake.
Because their honor didn't hinge on the Avatar's capture. Mine does.
The Avatar returns thus reveals that Aang is in fact the Avatar that Zuko is searching for. After he invades the Southern Water Tribe, Aang comes to the village's rescue. Aang offers to go with Zuko if he agrees to let the villagers go, and Zuko actually does keep his word, which hints that there's more to him than initially appears. Katara and Sokka go along to rescue Aang, and a good scene follows where they say goodbye to their grandmother. And as it turns out, Appa actually can fly!
I mean, big deal, he's flying.
Oh, you're impressed and you know it. Eventually, Aang is able to break out of the ship, but Zuko's determined to not let him go so easily. Katara and Sokka come to Aang's rescue. Through some sheer luck and Zuko underestimating Aang due to being a kid, the gang is able to escape and Zuko vows to never underestimate the Avatar again. All in all, this was a pretty okay 2-parter to open the series. We get establishment of the characters' personalities along with dropping hints that there's more to them than initially appears, particularly Zuko. The storyline continues in the following episode, the Southern Air Temple. So the Aang Gang, as fans like to call them, visit the Southern Air Temple to find any signs of the air nomads. Aang in particular has fond memories of his mentor Gyatso, who is voiced by the same actor who did Uncle in Jackie Chan Adventures, which is partly why I keep expecting him to say, "One more thing!" Meanwhile, Zuko heads for repairs to his ship, which keeps happening throughout this season. This is where we meet Admiral Zhao, Zuko's rival for the season trying to capture Aang, And it's pretty clear from their first interaction that Zuko and Zhao don't really get along.
You must regale me with all the thrilling details. Join me for a drink?
Sorry.
Fun fact, he's voiced by Jason Isaacs. The creators wanted someone who sounded like Jason Isaacs, and they got the actual guy. There's also some other character building, such as Katara mentioning that her mother was killed by the Fire Nation. Also, we learn about Avatar Roku, the Avatar before Aang. We also learn that Zuko has been banished from the Fire Nation by his own father, the Fire Lord. Eventually, Zuko gets so mad he challenges Zhao to an Agni Kai. We also get more hints as to the nature of Zuko's scar.
Prince Zuko, have you forgotten what happened last time you dueled a master?
I will never forget.
It's here we meet Momo, who is basically the team pet of the show. Aang finds out Monk Gyatso is dead, and it's here that we see the Avatar state. Basically, Aang becomes incredibly powerful and connects to all his past lives, but because of how powerful it is, Aang can only enter the state when he gets super emotional. Kind of like the Super Saiyan transformation. Zuko and Zhao have a pretty impressive fight, with Zuko managing to win by remembering his basics, but he chooses not to scar Zhao as well, further hinting that there's more to Zuko than appears, while Zhao is established to be completely dishonorable when he tries to attack Zuko in the back. The episode advanced the story by giving us more glimpses into Aang and Zuko's backstories, and also laid the groundwork for the season. From here, the show settles into a status quo. Aang, Katara, and Sokka land in a town for the day, while on their journey to the Northern Water Tribe, where inevitably either Zuko or Zhao comes after them to try to capture Aang. We see that in the next episode, The Warriors of Kyoshi, which would seem to be a filler episode but does progress Sokka's character a little bit, as I'll get into at the end. It's also here that we meet the Kyoshi Warriors, particularly Suki, who went on to become a fan favorite. They were originally only supposed to appear in this one episode, but were so popular they came back for future seasons.
Relax, Sokka. Where we're going, you won't need any pants.
Really should choose your words more carefully there, Aang. Not a bad episode, but not a great one either, just kind of okay. The following episode, The King of Omashu, has Aang, Katara, and Sokka visiting said city. It's a largely harmless filler episode, or at least appears to be, but it does show Aang reminiscing about his friend Bumi. I do like little snippets of the character's history. Basically, the king makes Aang have to do 3 tasks to keep Katara and Sokka from being encased in crystal. We also meet this wonderful little character.
My cabbages!
Of course, it turns out the king is Bumi all along, and the challenges were his way of getting Aang to think creatively, when he inevitably has to confront the Fire Lord. Overall, a perfectly fine episode. Then we get a mostly filler episode called Imprisoned, where the gang stop to help Aru rescue his father from a Fire Nation prison ship. It does progress Katara's character a little bit, particularly about how the necklace she wears is her mother's. But it does show the gang trying to take a little bit of the world back from the Fire Nation, and we get to see earthbending in action for the first time. At the end, Katara loses her necklace and Zuko finds it, which will come into play later on in the season. The storyline proper continues in the Winter Solstice 2-parter, where Aang for the first time visits the spirit world. The Avatar is essentially the gateway between the two worlds. I love the look of the spirit world. We also call into question the relationship between Aang and Appa. Is it simply a boy and his pet, or is there more to it than that? Meanwhile, Iroh is captured by Earth Kingdom soldiers, and we see a scene that shows he can see the spirits. They establish later that he's been to the spirit world. I'm not sure why they introduced this concept, considering it really doesn't go anywhere. At least not in this show. But we also get more insight into Zuko's character, as he has the choice to either chase after Aang or rescue his uncle. But he chooses the latter, showing that Zuko really does care about his uncle. The second part has our heroes invade the Fire Nation during the Winter Solstice so that Aang can meet and talk to his predecessor, Avatar Roku. Aang is helped by Shiu, the one fire sage who is still loyal to the Avatar. Everything climaxes here. Zuko and Zhao are both trying to capture Aang, and Aang finally meets Roku, where he tells Aang that Sozin's comic will be returning in the summer, and when it does, Fire Lord Ozai will be able to use it to permanently end the war in the Fire Nation's favor, thus giving us a timetable of when the show will end. What really stands out about this episode is when Aang emerges as Roku, and we really get to see what a fully powered Avatar can do. It's really quite impressive. The next episode, the Waterbending Scroll, finally sees Aang learning waterbending while Katara is supposed to teach him. But it turns out that he's better than her at doing the forms, which is something that gets flipped on its head at the end of the season, but we'll get to that. The main purpose of the episode is to introduce Katara's flaws to the audience. Mainly, she doesn't like getting upstage, and she shows no problem stealing from pirates. Okay, let's be honest, this episode is really famous for the scene where Zuko has Katara tied to a tree and puts her necklace around her. Ah, the scene that launched 1,000 shippers.
The internet's rife with footage of...
We're not there yet. At the end, all is well that ends well because stealing is wrong.
Stealing is wrong. Unless it's from pirates.
Except for the fact that stealing from pirates nearly caused all of you to be captured or killed, so bad take there. The next episode, Jet introduces us to, well, Jet. At first he appears to be on the gang's side, but as Sokka discovers, Jet doesn't care who you are, as long as you're from the Fire Nation, you are evil, whereas Sokka knows not to attack innocent people, and we get a taste of Katara's darker side. Don't make her mad. But we also see more complex layers of our characters. At what point does fighting justice make us as bad as our oppressors? Jet has fallen pretty far.
You became the traitor when you stopped protecting innocent people.
And I'm sure Jet will never be seen again. Now we are at this episode, an episode I have been dreading, The Great Divide, and it's near unanimously agreed to be the worst episode in the entire show. The plot revolves around Aang having to bring peace to two warring sub-tribes who believe they are wronged by the other. The plot is juvenile, every character is an idiot, and it doesn't even deepen the show's world. These are two refugees from the war and Aang has to guide them through the canyons, and to make matters worse, Aang solves the problem by lying, which really doesn't seem like the best kind of message to send. This really could have been used to develop how Aang would try to bring peace back to the world after defeating the Fire Lord, but of course we don't go into that. But on the flip side, we get The Storm, the episode where Avatar took off. During said storm, Aang is blamed for running away, which he did. This episode really goes into Aang and Zuko's backstories and their insecurities. Aang doesn't want to be the Avatar, he never wanted to be. All the kids stopped playing with him, and the final straw was them taking him away from Monk Gyatso. Tragically, Aang didn't know he was going to fight this decision, so it's a mistake of impulse, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Meanwhile, Iroh tells the crew of how Zuko got his scar. Upon a time, Zuko was a young, aspiring prince who looked forward to becoming Fire Lord of the country. But when he spoke out against the plan of using soldiers as decoys, he was challenged to an Agni Kai by his own father. Ouch. Zuko is so vulnerable and he cries out for his father to spare him, but Ozai just says,
You will learn respect, and suffering will be your teacher.
While Iroh looks away, we see two people smirking cruelly at Zuko's pain. Zhao and some girl who is a completely unimportant character that will never be seen again. This episode really elevated the series. We see more layers to Aang and Zuko, and it set the tone for everything that came after. Fortunately, the series would continue its high mark with the Blue Spirit. We see Zhao trying to get the Yu archers to capture Aang, but he can't because their commander won't allow it. But rather conveniently, Zhao is promoted to Admiral at that moment, thus making it an order. So, what made Zhao unable to make it an order before? Is he the same rank as this guy? Talk about lucky! Anyways, Katara and Sokka are sick, so Aang has to get some frogs to make them feel better. But is captured, only to be rescued by the mysterious Blue Spirit. The fight choreography is fantastic as Aang and the Blue Spirit make their way out. But as it turns out, the Blue Spirit is Zuko, because no one else can capture Aang but him.
If we knew each other back then, do you think we could have been friends too?
Yet despite that, Zuko does seem to think about it. The next episode is The Fortune Teller, a rather harmless episode, though it's finally the episode that confirms that Aang has a crush on Katara.
The internet's rife with footage of Spider-Man.
Not there yet. It's a relatively lighthearted episode designed to give people a breather, and it works pretty well. The storyline proper kicks up again with the next episode, Bato of the Water Tribe. Here the gang meets an old Water Tribe member named Bato, who was part of Katara and Sokka's father's army. It's also here we meet June, another character voiced by Jennifer Hale. We see a rather selfish side to Aang as he fears Katara and Sokka will leave him. He does eventually do the right thing, but nearly costs him his friendship with them. This whole episode plays to poor communication kills. If people just talked about their problems, everything could have been avoided. But what really sets it off is the fantastic battle between Aang and Zuko. The Deserter features Aang trying to learn firebending from Zhong, which is not right because he's supposed to learn waterbending, then earthbending, then fire. But this may be his only chance, but unfortunately he ends up burning Katara's hands because he doesn't control his fire. Fortunately, it turns out Katara can heal. Well, that's convenient. One thing I noticed, this tends to happen a lot in the first season. Well, aside from Zhao showing how ill-tempered he is, there really isn't much to say about this episode. It does progress the characters, so it's fine. The Northern Air Temple has the gang finding said temple, but seeing some refugees have taken to living there, Aang is upset because they're perfectly willing to destroy pieces of the temple to build their new home. And I'm kinda on Aang's side here. It's a bit of a shame to destroy history. But it turns out the mechanics has to help the Fire Nation, but through some trickery they are able to defeat the Fire Nation with a new war balloon. A damn pity they forget to destroy it though, as it ends up giving the Fire Nation a new weapon. With the episode The Waterbending Master, the gang finally reaches the Northern Water Tribe, and let me tell you, I love the look of the Northern Water Tribe. It's very breathtaking. Each of our main characters come across problems. Sokka falls in love with the Tribe Princess Yue, but she's engaged to a jackass. Ain't that always the way? Aang and Katara go to learn waterbending, but as it turns out, the Northern Water Tribe is very sexist towards women. They are only allowed to learn healing. Master Pakku refuses to teach Katara any waterbending, and Zhao figures out that Zuko was the Blue Spirit, so he sets up the pirates to kill Zuko. He survives, of course, but we really get some insight into Iroh's character, namely that he lost his son and he sees Zuko as one. Katara is able to put up a pretty good fight against Pakku, but in the end she's still no match for him. However, Pakku has a change of heart when it turns out that Katara's grandmother was the woman who left him. That's awfully convenient. You'd think he'd have recognized her earlier. But again, when it's convenient. But whatever the case, he realizes that sexism is wrong, and so he agrees to train Katara. Certain people need to be reminded that sexism is bad! So thus the season comes to a close with the two-parter of the Siege of the North. And one of my major problems is that Katara is already a waterbending master while Aang is goofing off, even though earlier it was shown that he could easily do techniques she struggled with. I get that this was done so Katara could be his teacher, but it really does not feel earned. But ultimately, black snow falls upon the Water Tribe. The Fire Nation has come to attack. Finally, we get to see a real battle ensue. Of course, this is a kid's show, so any casualties are inferred rather than shown. Like in G.I. Joe. Speaking of which, I'm probably going to do Transformers Generation 1 next year. Thought I'd plug that. Aang vows to make a difference this time. The action is amazing, but Iroh warns Zhao that nightfall is approaching, and with the moon, the Water Tribe will gain more power. Zhao critically says that he is aware of the moon problem, and says he will remedy it soon. Hearing the story of the moon and ocean spirits, Aang gets an idea to commune with them. So Aang enters the spirit world, meanwhile Sokka has to deal with Yue's jerk fiancé. Yeah, I gotta admit, this is the least interesting part of the finale for me. Zuko manages to sneak into the Water Tribe to capture Aang.
Uncle, you don't have to say it.
I think of you as my own.
Eventually, Aang manages to go to the spirit world, all the while Zuko appears to capture him. Though Katara puts up a valiant fight, eventually Zuko is able to get the upper hand when the sun comes out. Part 1 ends with Aang in Zuko's clutches while the Fire Nation renews its attack and breaches the walls. Part 2 opens with a battle ensuing onward. Iroh again preaches caution, but Zhao reveals that his plan is to kill the Moon Spirit. Iroh rightfully points out how stupid this is, but Zhao doesn't listen. Zuko shares some interesting character bits, namely his sister was born lucky while he was lucky to be born. Meanwhile, Aang is told by Roku to visit Ko, the Face Stealer. He's a very interesting character since Aang has to avoid making any expression or he will steal his face. I'd love to see Koei meet Mai from Season 2, he'd get frustrated.
I must be going now.
We'll meet again.
Yet I don't think they ever do. Oddly enough, unless you count that online game a few years back. Katara, Sokka, and Yue are able to find Zuko and Aang, and Katara easily defeats Zuko. But Aang refuses to leave Zuko to die in the snow. Zhao captures the Moon Spirit, cutting off the Water Tribe from their source of power. Yue reveals that the Moon Spirit gave her life when she was a baby. Ominous. Aang pleads that hurting the Moon Spirit will harm the world, although if Dragon Ball's taught me anything, no, it won't. Iroh agrees, and we get to see how terrifying he is when he's mad.
I'll unleash on you tenfold! Let it go now!
Zhao seems cowed, but then he kills the Moon Spirit, and we get to see how terrifying Iroh is when he's unleashed. Zuko confronts Zhao and the two fight as Aang joins with the Ocean Spirit to wipe out the Fire Nation Navy. Iroh reasons that since Yue was touched by the Moon Spirit, she may be able to give it back, and so she does, sacrificing herself to become the new Moon Spirit. A vengeful Ocean Spirit drags Zhao down to his fate. Zuko tries to save him, but Zhao refuses, giving Zuko one last look of contempt as he is dragged into the ocean where he'll never bother anyone ever again. The battle is won, but the cost was high, as the gang prepares for the next part of their journey and Zuko decides to rest.
I have a task for you.
Oh, hello, Zuko's sister. I guess you will be important. Season 1 of Avatar, well, the first half is merely okay, until you get to the Great Divide. Then the storm happens, and that's when the show becomes very addictive. Yeah, I complained about how contrivances save the day for the gang more often than not, and that's annoying, but at the end of the day, the characters were interesting and likable and compelling, so ultimately we didn't care. Well, so let's just cover what happened to them this season. Our protagonist, Aang, when we meet him, is pretty much like a shonen protagonist. He's happy, go-lucky, good-natured, and is at his happiest when he is being a normal kid. But deep down, he resents being the Avatar.
Why didn't you tell us you were the Avatar?
Because I never wanted to be.
One thing I've noticed is that he takes his failures very seriously and he doesn't want to make up for lost times. After he accidentally burns Katara, he vows to never firebend again, even though Katara points out that he has to if he's going to defeat the Fire Lord. Basically, he's being prepared for this big fight, and one thing the show doesn't set up too well is how Aang doesn't believe in violence. The most development he gets is his maybe one-sided attraction to Katara. A romantic development that I'm on, but we'll cover that in greater detail later. Zuko gets the lion's share of character development. While Aang, Katara, and Sokka were clearly good, and Zhao and the rest of the Fire Nation were clearly bad, Zuko on the other hand represented a shade of grey. You get the sense that he's not really a bad kid, just someone who makes bad decisions. I know people like to use the Draco and leather pants trope for when fans try to put good qualities on bad guys, but with Zuko the reaction is very much intentional. Whereas conversely, his rival Zhao doesn't get much development. His only purpose was to make Zuko into a villain you could root for. Once he filled that purpose, which he did nicely, he was killed off. And yeah, I know he showed up in Korra Season 2. Throughout the whole season, we get little moments of Zuko that humanize him, showing that despite expressing annoyance with his uncle, he does care about him deep down. He's impatient, hot-tempered, and brash, and never thinks things through. But that little moment where he tried to save Zhao made redemption possible for him. Katara is a little harder to put my finger on. She's protective, motherly, and proactive. It's obvious that losing her mother has taken its toll on her, so she feels the need to be motherly towards everyone she knows. Then there's the part where she tries to rally the Earthbenders to rebel.
Let us fight for our freedom!
She does have flaws as she hates being upstage, and being so motherly is a good thing, but also a bad thing. I will say that her development into a waterbending master wasn't really earned, because I'm going to assume most of it happened off screen. Sokka is the comic relief, the butt monkey, but he's smart and resourceful and wants to do right. He's probably the one who hates the Fire Nation the most of the protagonists. He had a minor sexist streak to him at the beginning of the season that was thankfully beaten out of him very quickly. Good thing too, because it made him nearly unlikable. We do see that he wants to be a warrior to protect the people closest to him, as the flashback of his father shows. But he's funny as hell, and his voice actor Jack DeSena really plays him so well. Iroh doesn't really get much this season except to give Zuko great sages of wisdom, for the most part. He means well, and you do wonder, why is his brother the Fire Lord and not Iroh when he's the older of the two? But honestly, he's the heart of the show. It's clear the writers intended for Katara to be the heart of the show, but really, it was Iroh. The reason Iroh doesn't get much development is because he went through his off-screen before the series began. We'll find out more about him next season. Avatar Book 1 Water was a good beginning to a great show. It has some problems, namely relying too much on contrivances and the terrible Great Divide episode, but this was just the beginning. All this was set up to greater things, the stepping stone if you will. So join me next time when we cover the nearly flawless Book 2, Earth.